It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, an author, a documentarian, a cultural commentator, Dinesh D'Souza. In a day and age when our society needs strong and articulate voices speaking from a solid Christian worldview perspective, Mr. D'Souza is effectively meeting that challenge. Mr. D'Souza is a former policy analyst in the Reagan White House, served as the John M. Olin Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He's a former president of King's College in New York City, has appeared on the Today Show, Nightline, the NewsHour on PBS, the O'Reilly Factor, Moneyline, Hannity, NPR's All Things Considered, the Kudlow Report, Lou Dobbs, and Real Time with Bill Maher. I'd like to add that I'm personally honored to be able to introduce Mr. D'Souza tonight because I've been using one of his texts in my class at Sacred Heart University for almost 12 years now, and the students love it. I don't think they receive that kind of education anywhere else on the university campus, unfortunately, but that's another story. He really is a phenomenal author and has had such a remarkable impact on the issues that we all care about today. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dinesh D'Souza.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I must say it is for me always humbling and a great honor to speak before an organization like this one. I speak a fair amount on college campuses, to various civic groups and political groups. And typically when you speak to an organization, you're talking to people who are fighting for something in which they have some benefit to derive. They would like to have their taxes cut, or they want to have their salaries raised. They want more of this or less of that, and at the end of the day, you know that there's something in it for them. Now, the something in it for them might make good sense, but these are people fighting, as we do in a democratic society, for their own interests. But very rarely, and every now and a long while, I come across a group that is fighting without having anything to gain. The pro-life movement, for example, to me is the most unselfish movement in America. It's fighting against other people who have a lot to gain. And it's calling upon only the better angels of our nature to mobilize on behalf of a cause for the reason that that cause is right. Now, the other thing that to me is very impressive about the Family Institute here in Connecticut is its laser-like effectiveness. This is a very important issue because social conservatives have been fighting battles now for a long time. If you use the 1973 Roe versus Wade decision as a kind of trigger point, we've been at this now for 35 years. And in the main, we've suffered more defeats than victories. In fact, we've seen on the abortion front just an accumulation of casualties, and even when we win, we seem to lose. I know in California, my home state, there was a sort of unexpected, extremely well-organized defeat of gay marriage. And then that was promptly undone by a series of decisions, first by the state court, and then ultimately by the Supreme Court. So here in Connecticut, you have an organization that knows how to win, knows how to pick its battles and apply force in a selective and effective way. And that is not the norm in the social conservative milieu around the country. Part of what I want to talk about is I want to actually offer a message of encouragement and inspiration and gratitude, but I also want to offer a kind of, I may say, clear-eyed diagnosis of why it is that we care so much and fight so hard, and we always seem to be rolling the stone up the hill. It would be kind of nice to be rolling the stone down the hill. So, what is the cause of our predicament? How did we get to this point? Now, part of it is stepping back for a moment and recognizing that, we hear a lot about American exceptionalism. I've written on it myself. Obama has commented on American exceptionalism. One topic that we often don't talk about is Christian exceptionalism. And what I mean by Christian exceptionalism is that many of the things that we fight about, things that we associate with America or with the West, only came into America and came into the West because of Christianity. In fact, we can see if we go to the pre-Christian West, which is ancient Greece, and Rome before Constantine, pre-Christian Rome, you actually begin to see many of the things that we now are trying to stop that were actually very widespread. So, for example, the disregard of human life, which is at the heart of the abortion debate, but it's also at the heart of the euthanasia debate, the assisted suicide debate, this idea that sort of life at the margins can be confiscated. Well, actually, that's not a new idea. In fact, it was the prevalent idea in ancient Greece and Rome. The Spartans, very famously, we know, would take the unwell, the sick child and deposit it on the hillside in the freezing cold only to find it dead in the morning. And that actually is not the great scandal. The great scandal is that the great thinkers of ancient Greece and Rome, Plato, Aristotle, and so on, knew about this, but regarded it with complete indifference. It was no big deal. Why? Because what we would call the preciousness of human life, the sacredness of it, if you will, that was actually not a Western value. That came into the West because of Christianity. That is a mark of Christian exceptionalism. So we have to realize that part of what we're seeing here in America is an effort to de-Christianize our society. And by de-Christianize our society, I don't mean just to shut down the churches or stop the sacraments. I actually mean to take what Nietzsche called the shadows of God, all the institutions that were created by Christianity, that came out of the Christian penumbra, and change them. So there's a kind of effort to excavate the Christian influence out of America. And that is going on in a pretty systematic way. It's worth knowing that, because it shows that what we're fighting about when we think about issues like religious liberty is the bigger question, which is that American society, in the way it's constructed, was built on a Christian foundation. Even people who were not very Christian knew that. Jefferson, for example, most of the founders were pretty orthodox, but Jefferson was probably on the less orthodox side, and yet when the founders dispatched him to say where our rights come from, he could only think of one source, the Creator. Now, I was speaking at a pro-life group about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, and I was accosted by a woman who actually had in her possession an incredible set of photographs of the unborn child in the womb, and she began to spin them out and show them to me. And of course, I'd seen photographs like that. This is a sort of almost, you may say, precursor of the Planned Parenthood videos. And her point was, we've got to show these photos to America, because if Americans could see these photos, then abortion would have to stop, because no decent person in good conscience could see these photos and allow this kind of thing to go on. And that got me scratching my head a little bit and thinking about that, because that's actually been one of the strategies of the pro-life movement, is to actually get the actual information, not just in clinical form, but in visual form, in front of people. And technology allows us to do that. And the question I ask myself is it actually true that if you were able somehow to show every American those photographs, would this in fact change America? Would this in fact repeal Roe versus Wade? And this issue came up to me again in my mind recently with the Planned Parenthood videos, because on the one hand you have these gruesome videos, and yet on the other hand you have all these public figures, starting with the president, and they appear to be serenely indifferent. If you read their message, it could be summarized as, who cares? What's the big deal? So how do you explain this? What's really going on here? What are these people on the other side whom we regard as fellow human beings with a conscience? What is their real position? Is their real position that it's actually okay to go out and kill people? And if not, what are they fighting for? Part of the way you fight effectively is you realize what your opponent is fighting for. So I actually want to try to cast a little bit of light on what that is. Now, I think that what we've seen in America over the last generation is we've actually seen not just a political revolution. We talk about the cultural revolution, the culture wars, but we've really also seen a moral revolution. And the moral revolution has been carried, I think, mostly not on the backs of the civil rights movement, although that's been very important, or the feminist movement. It's been carried mostly on the backs of the sexual revolution. And the point I'm making is that abortion is the debris of the sexual revolution. If you're going to have a sexual revolution, you're going to have a lot of unplanned pregnancies. And if you have unplanned pregnancies, something has to be done about them. What I'm trying to say, I guess, is that there was a phrase that the Marxists used to use: in order to make an omelet, you have to break some eggs. And what I'm getting at is that it's possible in America today that we've reached a point where there is a whole group in this country that is so committed to the sexual revolution, so unwilling to have it re-examined, reconsidered, repealed in any way, that any consequence of the sexual revolution is automatically defended as necessary, however gruesome. Why? Because if you were to question the result, you then have to question the activity that led to the result. You have to, in a sense, call into doubt something that has now become part of your life. I want to hearken back. The Planned Parenthood videos, in a sense, have thrown me back in thought into an analogy that is often disdained, but actually quite relevant to this case, the analogy with the debate 150 years ago about slavery. And I want to mention this debate because very often people think, well, that was totally different, Dinesh. That was a debate between the North and the South. That had nothing to do with what's going on now. Actually, wait a second. The debate about slavery was not between the North and the South. The debate in Illinois, for example, when Abraham Lincoln was running for the Senate, was against a Northern Democrat, Stephen Douglas. And the most eloquent defense of slavery came not from the South, but came from the North. Douglas actually argued that Lincoln was completely wrong to try to impose one view, slavery is wrong, on the whole country. And Douglas basically said, wait a minute, we live in a big country. We have moral diversity. So Douglas said, I favor, and he didn't use this phrase, but he might as well have. He goes, I favor the pro-choice position. Every state, every community should decide for itself if it wants to have slaves, yes or no. He goes, personally, I'm not for slavery, but it's not for me to decide. Let's agree to disagree. That's the way in a big country that people who don't agree on things can get along. Now, I would suggest that this argument is very similar in substance and, in fact, even in form to the central argument that is made today in defense of abortion. It's the pro-choice position articulated 150 years ago to the letter. And here's what's the most crushing. It's the argument is being made by the same people. It's being made by the same political party, and I would argue for the same reason. And what is the reason? Well, in trying to explain why we had slavery, Lincoln basically once said that slavery can be reduced to the following proposition: you work, I eat. In other words, it's really great to have other guys to work for you for free. They work, you eat. It's to your convenience, it's to your benefit to have slaves. And if you can have them, and if you can vote them in, then who is there to stop you? Now, why am I saying all this? I'm saying all this because I want to throw light on the fact that while we, on the conservative side, on the pro-life side, have been fighting through the political process, our opponents, cleverer than we are, have been fighting on the political front and on the cultural front. They know that there's a larger battlefield, and politics is just one small corner of that. Even right now, people are like, Dinesh, have you been watching the Republican debates? Who are you in for? Who are you for? Now, I'm not saying that's unimportant. I'm not saying it's unimportant who holds the Senate or who holds the House. But let me ask you this. Why is it that when Republicans hold both houses of Congress, they appear so ineffective? Why is it the case that our leaders run scared? Now, people say our leaders run scared because they're wimps. We got to throw them out. Problem is, if you throw them out, you're going to get other leaders who run scared. The reason that our leaders run scared is that they are terrified of the media. They are terrified that if they say something or put themselves out there, they will be lambasted, castigated, and in effect destroyed to such a point that their own side, we, will then sink them and shun them and have nothing to do with them. And they will have to retire quietly into obscurity. They know this. And that's why they behave in this manner. The reason they run scared is they have no cultural power. And the reason they have no cultural power is that when we look at the powerful institutions of our society, outside of politics, we would have to say that they are the media, entertainment, by which I mean Broadway and Hollywood, but more than that. And third, education. The radical secularists dominate all these three institutions. They control these megaphones. This is probably our greatest weakness. Why? Because they're able to win fights before they even come to the political debate. A case in point is gay marriage. People say, well, we lost the gay marriage debate. Well, this gay marriage debate began when Ellen DeGeneres came out of the closet, it seems now 2 decades ago. This gay marriage debate has been prosecuted in sitcoms and comedy shows, in movie scripts, and it's been digested by our young people to such a point that they cannot even imagine an opposing side. They don't even know what it is. They haven't rejected conservatism, they've never heard of it. So we have let the high ground of the culture slip away from us. And as a result, the other side has the big megaphones. Now, what do we do about this, and how do we respond to this peculiar situation? We do fight legislatively, yes. But at the end of the day, even if you win an election or two, there's no way to win in the long term when the culture slips away to this degree. In my own case, I've actually had some remarkable adventures in the last couple of years. In fact, just recently I finished an 8-year Well, it's a quasi-prison term, you might say, in a confinement center in San Diego. I've actually spent my nights with a whole group of hardened hoodlums. Very eye-opening experience. By the way, this was for my offense of exceeding the campaign finance laws. I gave $20,000 to a college friend who was running for the Senate, exceeding the campaign finance limits, and I was a target of an administration that is very intent on putting people like me out of business. Now, why people like me? The old Dinesh was a veteran of the Reagan White House, the American Enterprise Institute, the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, author of books and giver of speeches. That Dinesh was a pest as far as the administration is concerned, but not worth bothering about. A harmless drudge, a pointy-headed intellectual speaking in small groups of no serious consequence. But in 2012, I got on an airplane, I went to Hawaii, I went to Indonesia, I went to Kenya, I went into Obama's world and into his mind and into the bowels of his life. I met his grandmother at a family homestead, I interviewed his brother in the Huruma slum of Nairobi. I basically got under his skin. And I put it into a movie, which was on 2,000 screens, that was seen by 7 million people. And if the Romney campaign had decided, could have gone to every independent, undecided voter. The Romney campaign decided not to do that. But the point was, this is actually carrying the fight into a camp where you're reaching people that matter. Now you might say, here we are in Connecticut, what can we do? Now the truth of it is, in American politics, a small number of people who are creative and imaginative and determined can be extremely effective. I have to say, and this does not apply to you in this room, but in general, there's a disproportion of determination. The other side, far more determined than our side. And this is especially true of the Christians on the campus. For a while, I was going around the campuses debating leading atheists. And so I'd go to a Christian group and say, hey, I'd like to come to Yale and debate this prominent atheist. And they'd say, Dinesh, we are just very uncomfortable with this idea of a debate. We really favor a dialogue. I would say, well, to me, a debate is just a dialogue that our side wins. But while the atheists are missionary, they are, I would say, evangelical. They are far more into real proselytization than the Christians are. They want to make converts. In other words, they want to find believers and capsize their faith. There's a tremendous amount of determination. You get the feeling that Obama wakes up every morning and says, what can I do to put the knife a little deeper into them? That's the way he thinks. That's not the way the Republicans think. They basically say, how do we get through the day without the knife going a little deeper into us? Now, there is a totally different way to fight. Give you a small example of this. Last year, when I published my book, America, I learned through a journalist that the corporate giant Costco had decided as a corporate decision to lift every copy of my book off its shelves and pull it. Now, this is kind of odd because Costco had ordered the book, and the same people who ordered the book had decided to pull it. Why? Because the senior management of Costco was all politically on the other side. So somebody, it seemed to me, from the government had walked into Costco, what the heck is this guy's book doing here? Made a few phone calls, and all my books were gone. Out of Costco. Now, ordinarily, you could do nothing about this. This is a private corporation. It has every right to make this decision. But a small article about this appeared on an obscure website called WorldNet Daily. And over the next 24 hours, there are about 1,000 comments by indignant people, I guess fans of mine, on that site saying, what the heck? And then one of the members of that, I'll call them an online mob, decided, why are we on the WorldNet Daily site? Let's migrate to the Costco site. And so, over a period, this was a bit of a gathering snowball. This group of 1,000 people, over a period of about 48 hours, grew to 17,000 people. And so 17,000 people essentially bombed the Costco site. Now, bombing the Costco site essentially involved the following. When you shop in Costco, if you want to buy a pair of pants, you have to click on the pants and you get all these audience reviews. Love the pants, they fit great, they're so cheap, etc. But now when you click on the pants, that wouldn't work because you'd actually see some lady with the scissors cutting up her Costco card on the site. And this was true of all products. You couldn't buy grills, you couldn't buy books, you could buy nothing at Costco without seeing people cutting up their card and mailing it to the CEO. Now, the reason I tell you this is Costco is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. It has among the highest brand loyalty of any corporation. Here's a battle that would seem to be unwinnable. And yet, in 2 days, I receive a call from the CEO of Costco, who flies me into Seattle. When I sit down with him, I think he first made the mistake of thinking I was Jesse Jackson. He's like, so what do you want? What do you want? I guess he wanted me to say, I may be well-dressed, but I'm still oppressed, etc. But I had no iambic pentameter for him. I said to him, I want nothing. I said, I don't care if you have my book or you don't. I said, but I'm an immigrant. I've written a book on America, and you decided to pull it on the 4th of July. And your customers are really upset. And he said to me, you're destroying Costco. And I said, how can I destroy a multi-billion-dollar corporation all by myself? And nevertheless, within 24 hours, Costco had changed its policy, restored all my books to the shelf, ordered 25,000 new copies of my book. When my movie came out 2 weeks later, they built a special shelf. And now, what I'm trying to say is in an era of new technology, there is in this room a great deal of concentrated power. Most of that power is not being used. It is financial power. It's the power of influence. There are many influential people in this room. And then it's the power of networking. It's all the people you know. Social media for a moment. Just yesterday or the day before, I crossed 1 million fans on Facebook. Now, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, I wasn't even on Facebook. I didn't even bother. But I then realized that right now as we speak, if you were to turn on CNN, that there are approximately 700,000 people watching CNN on any given evening. In the day, it's about 400,000. Now remember that those people are not even loyal to CNN. They might be loyal to Anderson Cooper. But if Anderson Cooper were to move from CNN somewhere else, they'd go too. The loyalty isn't to CNN. On the other hand, here I am on a website, basically, and I've got 1 million people who care about what I have to say. My point is, in today's world, you can build CNN all by yourself. All by yourself. And so when we say that the other side has the media, no, they don't. Because it's possible for our side to build the media. Next year in the summer, I'll release a movie. It's my incendiary contribution to the election debate. It'll come out in the summer. Now, the movie will open on a given weekend. Because my last two movies were successful, this movie will open big. It'll open in 2,000 theaters, as compared to a Disney movie, which is, say, in 3,000 theaters. Because the Disney will take multiple screens in a single Cineplex. I just want to be in every Cineplex. But it'll open on a weekend. Now, that weekend, everyone watches to see how the movie does. If you go see the movie that weekend, and we do well, we'll go from 2,000 to 4,000 screens the next weekend. Here's my point. A lot of people say, well, I don't really want to go to the movies. I'd rather watch it at home. If you want to multiply your own effectiveness, it's only going to cost you $10, the price of 2 lattes. Don't just go to the movie, go see it in the theater, and go on the opening weekend. It's a way of leveraging your own influence times 10. And if you take 20 other guys, you're doing a lot to propel this film from being a nuisance to being a very dangerous presence in a close election. Or, here's another thought. In many states, Connecticut, California, Texas, the election is pretty much decided, and people say, well, Dinesh, what can I do? I live in a blue state. My vote doesn't count. Well, as it turns out, there's only a handful of counties in which a small number of people are going to decide the election. Happily, we know those counties, we know the names of those people and their addresses and their emails. Both sides have them. The Democrats have them, the Republicans have them. So, if you're wondering, what can I do to make a difference? What you actually can do is take messaging. Could be my movie, but could be anything. I'm only using my film as an example. And you could say, what could we in this room do to take this product and put it in the hands of 50,000 undecided voters in 10 counties that will actually decide the election? You can do that. You have it in your power now to do that. It's only a matter of deciding to do it. So the point I'm trying to make is, Abraham Lincoln said, and I want to wind down here, America is ruled by public opinion. Now, Lincoln did not mean by this that America is ruled by the opinions of the public. The opinions of the public are actually completely irrelevant. The ordinary American is utterly uninvolved in politics and goes to vote every 4 or 2 years if it isn't raining. Those people don't matter. Lincoln's point is that there is a smaller group of people, it's a subset of the population. I estimate in America now, in Lincoln's day it was maybe 40,000 people. Today it's maybe 200,000 people. These are the people who actually are hands-on, in some way involved in politics. I don't mean they're in government, they could be delegates, they could be bloggers, they're activists of one sort or another. Most of the people in this room would count in that group. And Lincoln's point is, these are the people who set the goalposts in which every politician has to move. So we, the few, we don't have to sway 150 million Americans. Nonsense. All you have to do is figure out ways to increase your influence and your leverage, multiply your circle, and apply creative, concentrated, intelligent power. We're fighting, ultimately, for the most fundamental principles that we live by. At the end of the day, this is not about our pocketbooks. It's not even about the kind of country we want to live in. Much as I believe in, much as I'm an immigrant and a patriot, at the end of the day, even my patriotism is built on top of moral and religious values that are themselves at stake. And the fact that those fights are conducted in a disguised way, we're fighting about non-discrimination, should not obscure the magnitude of what is at stake. So, I think we're in a moment of crisis, but we're also in a moment of great opportunity. Modern technology allows us to do things that we could never do before. I've been thinking in the last year or so about the issue of education. Higher education. If there's one propaganda vehicle for the secular left, it's the university. That is their megaphone. Now, our side has been trying to take the university back for God knows how long. Can't be done. You can endow a chair of free enterprise here. You can dispatch Dinesh or anybody else to go speak over there. But I'll come in on Monday and leave on Tuesday. At the end of the day, the professors are still there. They're fat and happy. They're going to be grazing on the liberal plantation, grazing unmolested. So, what do we do about something like that? Well, the answer is what we do about it is you figure out a way to take the whole system, and make it obsolete. In other words, you don't try to infiltrate the rotary phone industry. You build the academic iPhone. Because if you build the academic iPhone, even though not everybody will buy it tomorrow, it'll be obvious when you build it that every other phone is obsolete. Now, that can be done today in a way that you couldn't do 30 or 40 years ago. You would need billions of dollars to build hundreds of campuses all over the country, if not the world. You would need innumerable professors to staff those colleges. It's a quixotic undertaking. The undertaking I'm describing is completely doable. And doable in a short time, and its effect would be cataclysmic and devastating in the same manner that the technological revolution has ruthlessly swept over industries, leaving entire groups of people in its wake, toppling existing ways of doing things. I remember there's a line in Henry Bessema's diary. He's talking about his new method of refining steel, done through a new chemical process that he developed. And he does a test to see if it's going to work. And he tests it, and it works. And he writes, he goes, "At this moment, I could see in my mind's eye the collapse of the great iron industry of the world. And all its power, all its resources, immense and innumerable though it may be, were completely powerless against the small result that I had obtained last Tuesday. In other words, here's a better way of doing things, and all the rest of this is going to have to accommodate to that." We're at a moment where this kind of opportunity is available to us. It looks to me that in American history, it's very rare, maybe 3 to 4 times in history, when the fate of things hangs in the balance. The American dream hangs in the balance. And at that time, it calls upon incredibly committed people who are willing, who don't say, "Oh, I'm going to wait till tomorrow. Oh, oil prices are down. Oh, I'm not going to do it." No, they recognize that what has to be done now, and has to be done by them. And they have to put resources at the wheel that they normally wouldn't. And they're doing it not just because they value their own homestead, but they value the preciousness of the innocence of their own kids. And they recognize that there are things that are worth really fighting for, fighting in the way that we can marshal ourselves to do. One of the peculiar aspects of my personality is that my recent experiences at the hands of the Obama administration, far from sort of diminishing my enthusiasm, have sort of stirred me up like a gnat. I've become extremely irritable. As I walked out of the confinement center in early morning, I was actually let out at 4 a.m. in the morning. There's a bunch of reporters there. They're like, "How does it feel, Dinesh?" And I go, "Well, feels to me a little bit like it felt to Winston Churchill during the Boer War." He said, "It is very exhilarating to be shot at without result." I want to urge you to support this group that knows what it is doing and fighting in a concentrated way at the local and the national level to make a difference. I want you to abandon a little bit of ordinary complacency, because we don't live in ordinary times. I want to urge you to become a very dangerous American and a very dangerous Christian. And by that I mean a Christian equipped, not only with knowledge, but with creative ways of engaging the debate. ways that actually, you'll know that your way is creative when the other side becomes extremely flummoxed and extremely abusive. Their abusiveness is a mark that you actually are scoring a point. You've put them on the defensive, you've got them up against the wall. The moment that they seem super cordial and condescending, you know that they have you exactly where they want you. When you've really upset them, and usually you upset them not because what you've said about them is false, but because what you said about them is true. If it were false, it would not be so upsetting. But if it's true, it's going to draw its mark. We have a younger generation in America today that does not like the fog of sloganeering. The reason our warmed over Reaganite rhetoric of 30 years ago doesn't get through, it's unreal to them. The reference points have been lost. The Cold War is a distant memory. You have to speak to people straight. You have to tell them exactly what is at stake, exactly what you're going to do about it. That is our challenge. That is why we're here. It's my honor to be part of this group and to speak on behalf of it. And I want to urge you to mobilize your forces, unify, focus, and get to work. Thank you very much.